red tide. It is an evil, terrible algae that sweeps through Florida every summer, resulting in many ruined vacations and, more importantly, lots and lots of dead fish.
That's what a lot of people think. So what is red tide?
Hi, and welcome to Paige's Planet. Today, I'm going to be answering all of your questions about red tide. Well, first things first, the term red tide is not a very good or correct scientific term. It's called red tide because sometimes in a red tide event, the water looks red. But in other events and in other places of the world, the water might turn green or brown or even purple. It might even remain normal colored. So the correct scientific term is a harmful algal bloom.
Hold on a minute. What's algae? Algae are just simple plants. They can live in the sea or in fresh water. By the way, not all algal blooms are harmful. Most are awesome. A lot of the different animals in the sea feed on algae, so algae is basically the fuel that feeds the entire ocean food web. There's a teeny weeny little percentage of algae, though, that produce toxins that can kill sea life and even make people sick. But let's talk about that later. Oh, by the way, harmful algal blooms, or HABs for short, they also include ocean dead zones, but I'm gonna save that for another video.
Here in Florida, the culprit algae is called K. brevis. It produces brevetoxins. They affect the central nervous system of fish and vertebrates, which sadly causes them to die. And for people with chronic respiratory infections, it can cause them a lot of problems. Most people aren't affected. They can even swim if there's red tide and it should be fine. But some people will get irritated eyes or skin. And of course, if you have a chronic respiratory condition, red tide can be a big problem.
Okay, so what causes these harmful algae blooms? Is it humans? Scientists are still learning a lot about HABs. There are a few things that are known for sure, though. One is that these harmful algal blooms begin offshore and then move onshore.
It's pretty safe to say that humans are not causing red tide. It occurred long before human settlement was even a thing.
It is possible, though, that the human-contributed nutrients, like the fertilizer that runs off the land into the sea, is helping to feed K. brevis and make these HAB events, these red tide events, much larger than they would otherwise be. So that brings me to the story with Lake Okeechobee, and unfortunately, this is where things get a little bit political. The last thing I want to be is divisive, so I'm going to keep this as fact-based as I can. Bear with me, please. Lake Okeechobee, a huge freshwater lake in Florida, collects all of the runoff, all of the herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers, and all of a sudden there's just too much grossness in there and it explodes with a blue-green algae and it's just nasty. So state officials basically decide that it's time to flush that guy out. And unfortunately, they flush it into the ocean. The question is whether or not this flushing has caused red tides in Florida to grow larger. It could affect some laws and really affect industries like the agriculture industry, for example. So there's a lot of pushback and a lot of lack of funding for scientists who are trying to look and see if there's a link between those two things. Most likely there is a link between these HABs and the dumping of Lake Okeechobee. Not that it's causing them, but it's probably making them worse and feeding them. However, scientists are not funded so that they can find out for sure, which has left them feeling very frustrated.
We do know that over time the algae amounts in red tides are increasing. But it's not a consistent thing. It goes up and down a little bit, and scientists don't really know why that is or exactly what's causing it.
So, is there any way that I can help?
We can limit our use of the nutrients that might be fueling red tide, like herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers. And of course, we can write to our local legislators telling them that environmental issues are important to us and vote for candidates that take environmental issues seriously.
Thank you so much for watching. I am gonna go do a little snorkeling. I hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye!